Maya Ellison had not eaten meat in 31 years. Not chicken, not fish, not one bite of pork in her life. So when the surgeon lifted her brain scan up to the light and started counting them, 1 cyst, 2, 4, more than a dozen pale spheres scattered through the folds of her brain, each one with the curled head of a tapeworm sleeping inside it. Nobody in that room could tell her how they got there. She was 34. She taught prenatal yoga. She read every label in the grocery store twice, and there were worms in her brain. By the end of this, you're going to know exactly how that happened, how a woman who never touched meat ended up infected by a pork tapeworm. And you're going to understand the part that still makes neurologists lower their voice. The most dangerous day of Maya's life wasn't any of the months those things were alive inside her skull. It was the day they started to die. Because here's what almost nobody understands about this parasite. You do not have to eat pork to get it into your brain. Maya never could have eaten her way into this. The door it came through was something far more ordinary than a plate of food, and it was in her kitchen the whole time. This is symptom 0. If you set out to design the last person on Earth who should end up with a parasite, you'd build Maya. She'd been vegetarian since she was 3 years old, a choice her family treated like a personality trait. She drank filtered water. She scrubbed her vegetables. Her younger brother, Dev, needled her about it at every family dinner. Dev ate everything. Street carts in 3 countries, gas station sushi, the questionable taco at 2 a.m. He had an iron stomach and a running joke that Maya was going to get herself killed by being too clean. Hold on to that joke. Because of the 2 of them, only one would end up with something living in their head. And it wasn't Dev. For most of that year, nothing was wrong. That's the strange thing about this. For most of that year, there was nothing to notice. Maya felt completely fine. She was not fine. She just didn't know it yet. Somewhere in the quiet real estate of her brain, the cysts were already there, sitting still, doing nothing, waiting. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, in the middle of a class. Maya was kneeling on her mat, talking a room full of expectant mothers through a breathing exercise when the words stopped meaning anything. The room slid sideways. There was a smell that wasn't there, something burnt and metallic, and then nothing at all until she opened her eyes on the floor with a circle of frightened faces above her and someone already on the phone with an ambulance. A first seizure in a healthy 34-year-old is an alarm bell. You don't just seize for no reason. So in the emergency department, they did what you'd hope they'd do. They put her in the scanner and they looked inside her head, and the room went quiet. Maya's brain was not clean. Scattered across it were rounded masses, more than a dozen of them, pale and well-defined and ringed with the angry brightness of swelling tissue. To the team in front of that screen, there was really only one word that fit a young woman with multiple masses lighting up across her brain. Tumors. They thought it was cancer. The kind that has already spread from somewhere else and seeded the brain. They started planning the hunt for the original tumor. They started bracing to tell a 34-year-old that her body was full of cancer and they didn't yet know where it had started. They were wrong. But you can't blame the read. What was sitting in Maya's brain is so good at impersonating a tumor that doctors have a nickname for it. They call it a great imitator. Its cysts get mistaken for tumors, for abscesses, for tuberculosis, especially by doctors who almost never see the real thing. And in that hospital, nobody had. What saved Maya was a single neurologist and a single question. She came down to read the scan herself, and something about the pattern bothered her. The masses were too round, too uniform, and in the center of one of them, on the finer imaging, there was a detail that does not belong in any tumor. A tiny bright dot, sitting inside the cyst like a seed inside a grape. She had seen that dot exactly once before, years earlier, in a textbook. She knew what it was. It was a head, the head of a tapeworm. So she asked the question nobody else had thought to ask. She didn't ask Maya what she ate. She asked Maya who cooked. And the answer was the whole case. For 2 years, Maya's family had employed a gentle, beloved housekeeper who did most of the cooking. A woman who, it would turn out, was carrying an adult tapeworm in her own gut and had absolutely no idea. She wasn't sick. She didn't feel a thing. People can carry this worm for years and never know, because the adult worm, the one you get from eating undercooked pork, mostly just sits in the intestine and quietly does its job. And its job is to lay eggs. This next part is the part the headlines always get wrong, so I want to take it slowly. There are 2 completely different diseases hiding inside one parasite. If you eat raw or undercooked pork that has the larval cysts in it, you get the adult tapeworm, a long worm anchored in your intestine. It's unpleasant, but it mostly stays put. That's the version Maya's housekeeper had and never knew about. The second disease is the one that puts cysts in Maya's brain, and you don't get that one from pork at all. The CDC says it about as plainly as a government agency ever says anything. Eating pork cannot give you cysticercosis. You get it from swallowing the eggs. The eggs come out in the stool of a person carrying the adult worm. If that person doesn't wash their hands and then handles food, the eggs go onto the food. And from the food, into the next person's mouth. That's the whole door. A microscopic egg traveling from one person's gut to another person's hands to another person's dinner. It didn't matter that Maya was vegetarian. It was never about the meat. It was about whose hands touched her food. And it could be almost anyone. The carrier doesn't have to be a stranger. People carrying the adult worm can pass the eggs to their own family and can even reinfect themselves, all without a single symptom to warn them. Somewhere upstream of Maya's dinner, someone was shedding microscopic eggs and had no idea. So follow one of those eggs into Maya. She swallows it without tasting it. In her stomach, the shell dissolves, and out crawls a larva smaller than a grain of sand. It chews a hole through the wall of her intestine, slips into her bloodstream, and from there it goes wherever the blood goes. And the blood goes everywhere. Some end up in muscle, where they can sit for years as small, hard lumps. Some lodge in the eye, close enough that in those cases a doctor looking in can actually see it. A pale cyst with a living larva curled inside. And some ride the current all the way up into the brain. Wherever one stops, it digs in, swells into a fluid-filled bladder, and grows the tiny head of the tapeworm it will never become. A cyst. In Maya, more than a dozen of them, parked in the soft tissue of her brain. And then, the cruelest part, they go quiet. While the larva is alive, the cyst is a smooth little bubble the immune system barely reacts to. It can sit there, silent, for years. No pain, no symptoms, no warning. Maya carried hers through an entire year of teaching, sleeping, laughing at Dev across the dinner table with no idea they were there. So what changed? What turned a silent passenger into a seizure on a yoga studio floor? The larva died. That's the twist that makes this parasite so strange. The cyst is most dangerous not when the thing inside it is alive, but when it dies. As the larva degenerates, the immune system finally notices it and it attacks. It swarms the dying parasite with inflammation, and that storm of swelling, right there in the brain, is what sets off the seizure. The danger wasn't the worm, the danger was the funeral. And this is what makes it so hard to ever see coming. By the time that funeral starts, the meal that planted the egg can be years in the past. The seizure arrives out of a clear sky. No recent illness, no bad meal, nothing to point at. The thing has been sitting so quietly, for so long, that nobody thinks to look for a worm. Now multiply that across the world, and you start to see the size of this thing. The World Health Organization calls it the most frequent, preventable cause of epilepsy on the planet. In the regions where this parasite is common, it's behind roughly a third of all epilepsy, and in some communities as much as 70%. Somewhere between 2.5 and 8 million people are living with these cysts in their heads right now. And if you're telling yourself this is a faraway problem, it isn't. In the United States alone, this infection sent people to the hospital more than 18,000 times in a single decade. They confirmed it the way you'd hope, not on the scan alone. A blood test, an antibody test called the EITB, came back positive, the kind of result that, when several live cysts are present, is almost never wrong. And on the full images, the pattern was unmistakable. Not one mass, but a scatter of bright points across the brain. The picture radiologists grimly call a starry sky. So they had their answer. Not cancer. Neurocysticercosis, the brain form. The relief in that room must have been enormous. And then the relief hit a wall, because treating this is its own trap. The drugs that kill the cysts work exactly the way you'd want them to. They kill the cysts. But you already know what happens in the brain when one of these cysts dies. The immune system attacks. The brain swells. The seizures get worse. Hit a brain full of living cysts with a drug that kills all of them at once, and you can set off the very catastrophe you're trying to stop. So the doctors did something that sounds backwards. Before they gave Maya a single dose of the drug that kills the parasites, they flooded her with steroids to hold down the inflammation and keep the brain calm while the cysts died off in a controlled way. Steroids first, then the kill. Plus medication to stop the seizures, and a careful watch to make sure none of the dying cysts were sitting somewhere that could block the fluid in her brain and force surgery. It worked. Slowly, carefully, it worked. The cysts that hadn't already died were killed off under the cover of the steroids. The seizures came under control. Maya kept her life, and that matters, because this is where the fear should turn into something useful instead of just dread. This is a treatable disease. Caught and managed properly, most people recover. Maya is not a tragedy. She's a warning. So here's the warning, and here's what to do with it. The doctors who first untangled cases exactly like Maya's, people with brains full of cysts, who had never eaten pork and never left their own country, left medicine a rule that still saves lives. You can hand it to your own doctor. If someone has a first seizure as an adult and a brain scan shows cysts, the words to say are, rule out neurocysticercosis. Even if they're vegetarian, even if they've never traveled, especially then, because those are exactly the people who get told it's a tumor, and it is not hypothetical. Doctors have documented this exact picture, a brain and body studded with cysts, in a lifelong vegetarian. For most people who ever feel it at all, a seizure is the first warning, and sometimes the only one they get. And the way you keep it from ever reaching you is almost insultingly simple, because the whole chain hangs on one fragile step, a microscopic egg getting from one person's gut to another person's mouth. Break that step, and the whole thing falls apart. Wash your hands, really wash them, after the bathroom and before you touch food. Wash your produce. The most sophisticated parasite in this entire story is beaten by soap in 30 seconds at the sink. Maya went back to teaching. She still reads every label twice, but she'll tell you the label was never the thing that almost killed her. The thing that almost killed her was invisible, and it was never on the menu. It was on a pair of hands. If this case got under your skin, the last one will too. The patient who was perfectly healthy right up until the moment they weren't. It's one click away. We'll see you in the next case file.